He laughed at my job as a waitress until the day I bought the restaurant and fired him. I remember his smug grin, so certain I'd never be more than a girl in an apron. But the very place he mocked became the stage for his downfall. It took betrayal, heartbreak, and nights I almost gave up to get there. And to understand how it all unfolded, let me take you back to the beginning. The restaurant was never quiet. It was a place that hummed with life. From the moment I tied my apron until the last chair was flipped upside down at closing, the smell of grease and coffee clung to my hair no matter how many showers I took. My feet ached so often that pain became a constant rhythm, something I stopped noticing until I finally lay down at night. And yet there was something about that chaos, the sizzling from the grill, the hiss of the soda machine, the chorus of conversations all colliding that felt like home. Being a waitress wasn't a dream job, I'll admit that. It wasn't what little girls fantasize about when they're asked what they want to be when they grow up. But it was mine. It paid the bills. It gave me purpose. And most of all, it gave me dignity. Every dollar I earned came from my own hands, my own sweat, and my ability to keep moving, even when exhaustion begged me to stop. I had my regulars, tooth old man who ordered black coffee every morning and tipped me with quarters stacked neatly on the counter. The young couple who came in every Friday, holding hands across the booth, their eyes shining with the kind of love I used to believe in. These people saw me, and in their own quiet way, they respected me. To them, I wasn't just a waitress. I was part of their lives, even if only for the length of a meal. And then Evan walked in. He wasn't a regular. He wasn't the kind of man who belonged in a diner like ours at all. He strolled in one evening with a group of friends, all sharp suits, polished shoes, and laughter that carried like they owned the air. Evan was magnetic, the kind of man who turned heads without even trying. His watch alone probably cost more than my monthly rent. And his smile was the sort of smile that felt like it had been rehearsed, but still made you feel chosen when it landed on you. When I came to take their order, he was different from the others. While his friends barely looked at me, rattling off their requests like I was invisible, Evan met my eyes. He asked for recommendations. He joked about the menu, not in a cruel way, but as if I was on the conversation, not outside of it. And when they left, I found his number scribbled on the back of the receipt with a small smiley face beside it. My heart fluttered. No one had ever seen me like that before. At first, it was everything I thought I wanted. He swept me into a world I had never touched before. Rooftop dinners with candles flickering against the night sky. Weekends at hotels where the sheets were so soft they felt like clouds. Flowers delivered to the restaurant just for me. For a girl who spent her nights counting tips in crumpled bills and coins, it felt like I was living in a dream. For once, I wasn't worried about scraping together rent or choosing between groceries and gas. With Evan, I felt chosen. But dreams have a way of cracking when you stare at them too long. It started with little comments, the kind you can laugh off if you try hard enough. One night at that rooftop bar, after too many glasses of wine, Evan leaned back in his chair, looked me up and down, and smirked. "You're cute," he said. "Cute for a waitress." It was said with a chuckle, as if it were the most harmless observation in the world. I forced myself to laugh, though my stomach twisted into knots. Cute for a waitress, not just cute, not beautiful, not enough on my own, always tied to that apron, as if it defined every ounce of my worth. The comments didn't stop. They became a pattern, a rhythm as steady as the pain in my feet. He'd say it when his friends were around, like it was some inside joke at my expense. One evening, his friends dropped by the diner. I still remember their smirks as I set down their plates. One of them whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Careful, Evan, she might spill it." The table erupted with laughter, and there was Evan, laughing too, like it was the funniest thing in the world. I smiled because what else could I do? I smiled and I laughed, and I played along, because I told myself it was better than looking weak. But when I got home that night, I walked straight into the bathroom, stood in front of the mirror, and stared at myself in that uniform I had once worn with pride. For the first time, I didn't see a hard-working woman. I didn't see dignity or strength. I saw someone small, someone to laugh at. That was the beginning, not of love, not of a fairy tale, but of me learning how quickly laughter can cut when it's aimed at the one thing you've built your life around. I told myself it was just a joke, but the jokes were only getting louder. Being with Evan was like living in two different worlds at once. By day, I was still hustling at the diner, balancing plates on aching arms, pouring coffee for regulars, pocketing tips in crumpled bills and coins. By night, I was swept into his glittering universe, where chandeliers sparkled overhead, and waiters in pressed suits carried trays of champagne like they belonged in a movie. I tried to convince myself that I fit there, that maybe this was my new normal, that I could scrub the smell of bacon grease from my hair and walk into his world as though I belonged. And at first, it was intoxicating. Evan knew how to dazzle. He opened doors, he pulled out chairs, he ordered bottles of wine without even looking at the price. When people looked at him, their eyes lit up with admiration. When he looked at me, I felt chosen, like he'd plucked me from the ordinary and dropped me into something extraordinary. But there was always that undercurrent, that little twist in his voice whenever he brought up my job. At first, it was subtle. "You work so hard, babe. One day you won't have to." But then it turned sharper. "Why tire yourself out waiting tables when you could be with me? Don't worry, I'll take care of you." It should have felt protective. Instead, it felt like he was trimming away parts of me until nothing was left but what he wanted. The moment that broke something inside me happened at his office party. I can still see the glass building lit up against the night sky as we walked in. I remember feeling out of place the second we stepped through the revolving doors. Everyone was polished, dressed in clothes that looked like they had been tailored to perfection. Their laughter echoed through the room, light and effortless, as if the weight of bills and double shifts had never touched them. I smoothed down my thrift store dress and prayed no one would notice how nervous I was. I clung to Evan's arm, trying to borrow some of his confidence. He, of course, thrived. He shook hands, traded jokes, and basked in the attention like he'd been born for it. When we approached a group of his colleagues, he slipped his arm around me. I braced myself for the introduction. I wanted so badly to hear him say, "This is Sarah, my girlfriend." Just that. Just enough to show I mattered. Instead, he flashed that perfect smile and said, "This is Sarah, me waitress." For a moment, the world tilted. His colleagues laughed, some covering their mouths as if it were just harmless fun, others snickering openly. And there I stood, cheeks burning, pulse racing, the smile plastered on my face like a mask. My waitress, not Sarah, not his partner. Just a punchline in a suit-draped comedy skit I had never agreed to perform in. I tried to laugh along, but the sound caught in my throat. My chest ached with humiliation. I wanted the ground to open and swallow me whole. I excused myself, muttering something about needing air, and stumbled out onto the balcony, The night was cold, biting against my skin, but I welcomed it. At least the chill reminded me I was alive. I gripped the railing and stared at the city lights below, tears blurring them into streaks of gold and white. In that moment, I realized I wasn't Cinderella at all. I wasn't living a fairy tale. I was a prop, a story he told for laughs, something to make him look more powerful in a room full of people who already worshipped him. Later that night, when the party was over and he dropped me off, I still went to my late shift at the diner. The contrast was almost cruel. Hours earlier, it'd been surrounded by glittering glass and laughter that cut like knives. Now I was back to sticky counters, the smell of fries, and the buzz of neon lights. But oddly enough, it felt safer here. Even when I was tired, even when the customers were rude, at least here I wasn't a punchline. At least here I was me. I wiped down a booth near the back, my hands moving automatically, though my mind was still caught in the echo of their laughter. That's when I noticed an older woman who always sat at table 7. She'd been coming in for years, quiet but observant. That night, her eyes lingered on me a little longer than usual. There was something in her expression, a question she hadn't yet asked, a knowing that made me pause. I didn't realize it then, but that woman sitting alone at her usual table was about to change everything for me. There's a reason regulars matter in a place like the diner. They're part of the rhythm, part of the heartbeat that keeps the doors open even on slow nights. And no one embodied that rhythm more than the woman at table 7. She was there nearly every evening, her silver hair catching the glow of the neon sign in the window, a book always resting open in her hands. She drank her tea slowly, never in a rush, and when she wasn't reading, she was observing, not staring, not judging, just quietly watching the world around her, as though she saw things the rest of us missed. For months, she was just part of the scenery, someone I smiled at when I refilled her tea and thanked when she left a tip. But after the night of Evan's office party, the night he introduced me as my waitress, in front of a room full of strangers, something shifted. I came into work raw, my chest heavy with humiliation I couldn't shake. I tried to hide it behind the usual smile, but I wasn't fooling anyone, especially not her. She closed her book when I passed her table and looked at me with eyes sharp as glass. "You've got more on your mind tonight than menus and coffee refills," she said. Her voice startled me. I forced a laugh, shrugging it off. "Just tired. Double shifts, you know how it is." But she didn't nod politely and go back to her book. Instead, she tilted her head, studying me. "I know tired," she said. "This isn't that." I froze. I wasn't used to people seeing through me like that. Customers weren't supposed to notice the turmoil behind the smile. They were supposed to see the uniform, the tray, the service, not the girl underneath, who was cracking little by little. "I'm fine," I said quickly, trying to busy myself by wiping the counter. But her voice followed me, soft and steady. "What do you want, dear?" The rag slipped in my hand. I turned to her, confused. "Excuse me?" She repeated the words, slower this time. "What do you want? Not tonight, not your shift, your life." The questions stopped me cold. No one had asked me that in years. Evan never asked. He told me what I should want: nicer clothes, a better car, to quit the diner and let him take care of me. My coworkers never asked either. We were all too busy surviving. And my family, well, since my parents passed, no one had really been around to ask anything of me, except if the bills were paid. My throat tightened. I wanted to answer her, but my chest ached with all the things I couldn't say. That I wanted to be respected, that I wanted to be seen, that I wanted to stop feeling like a joke in the mouth of the man who was supposed to love me. But saying those things out loud felt dangerous, like naming them might prove they were impossible. So I just laughed weakly. I don't know. She smiled knowingly, as though she'd heard that answer before from someone else. Then maybe it's time you find out. The next evening, she was back at table 7 as always. But this time, when I came to refill her tea, she slid something across the table toward me. A notebook, worn leather cover, edges frayed, pages stuffed with scribbles and folded receipts. I blinked. "What's this?" "My life," she said simply. 30 years of running a restaurant. The mistakes, the lessons, the numbers that mattered. It's all in there. I hesitated, one hand hovering over the notebook as if it might burn me. "Why are you giving this to me?" She chuckled softly. "Because you need it. I see the way you watch this place. You're not just serving tables, you're studying. You notice when the flow is off. You see when a table's about to turn before anyone else does. You already think like an owner. You just don't realize it yet." Her words lodged in my chest. Me? An owner? I'd never let myself even imagine it. "I'm not," I started, but she cut me off with a raised hand. "Don't tell me you can't," she said firmly. "You can. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but one day, yes. And this," she tapped the notebook, "will help." I took it with shaking hands, clutching it to my chest like it was a treasure I didn't deserve. For the rest of my shift, I carried it with me. The weight of it strange but comforting. When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat cross-legged on the floor with the notebook spread across my lap, flipping through the pages under the dim light of my bedside lamp. The handwriting was cramped but careful, filled with charts, sales records, recipes, supplier notes, and staff schedules. She'd written about slow nights and busy ones, about how to manage food waste, how to negotiate prices, how to train people with patience. It wasn't just numbers, it was a lifetime of survival, carved into ink and paper. As I turned the pages, something began to stir inside me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't replaying Evan's laughter in my head. I wasn't hearing his voice call me just a waitress. I was hearing another voice mine, a voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, I was capable of more. By dawn, my eyes were burning from lack of sleep, but my hands were steady. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something I'd almost forgotten: possibility. That little notebook was more than a gift, it was a spark, and I had no idea yet just how much it was about to change my life. The notebook from Table 7 became my secret world. I carried it everywhere, tucked in my bag like a hidden treasure. At work, I slipped it onto the shelf by the register and scribbled notes between tables. At night, I sprawled across the floor of my small apartment, reading by the weak yellow light of a second-hand lamp. The pages smelled faintly of coffee and age, the ink smudged in, places by fingers that had clearly turned them over thousands of times. It felt alive, like the very heartbeat of a restaurant had been captured inside. Suddenly, the diner wasn't just a place I worked, it was a classroom. I stopped moving through shifts on autopilot. Instead, I started studying everything. I watched how long customers stayed in their seats before ordering. I noted which dishes were sent back to the kitchen half-eaten. I tracked tips and compared them to my service speed, adjusting my rhythm until I could predict when the difference between a $5 tip and a $10 tip was just 30 seconds of attention at the right moment. I experimented quietly, almost like a scientist. If I rearranged the order in which I delivered drinks, would people order faster? If I joked with customers before handing them their check, would they tip more? Slowly, patterns began to appear, and with each discovery, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. But not everyone shared my excitement. One night, after a long shift, I sat on Evan's couch with the notebook open across my lap. My hands were black with pen marks where I'd been scribbling notes. Evan walked in, loosened his tie, and glanced down. He frowned. "What's that?" he asked. It's a guide," I said cautiously. "The woman at table 7 gave it to me. She used to run a restaurant for 30 years. I've been studying it, tracking things at work. It's actually incredible. If we changed just a few things, like the prep schedule or the way orders are organized, we could cut wait times in half. Customers would notice. They'd come back more often." I looked up at him, waiting for some sign of encouragement. Instead, he laughed, a low, dismissive laugh that sank straight into my stomach. "Sarah," he said, shaking his head, "you're a waitress. That's all you'll ever be. Leave the business talk to people who actually know what they're doing. Trust me, nobody cares about your little notes." I closed the notebook slowly, biting my lip until I tasted blood. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, but I didn't. I just sat there in silence because I had learned something about Evan. Every time I pushed back, he pushed harder. And I didn't have the energy to fight him with words. So I chose another way. I fought him with actions. The next day at the diner, I tested one of the systems from the notebook. I asked the cook to prep burger toppings in a different order so I could build plates faster. He grumbled at first, but then his eyes widened when he realized tickets weren't stacking up like they usually did. Service moved smoother. Customers got their food faster. And by the end of the night, my tip jar was heavier. Small wins. Tiny victories no one else seemed to notice. But I noticed, and each one became a brick in the foundation I was secretly building. I was tired, so tired I sometimes nodded off, with my face pressed against the notebook, waking with its leather imprint on my cheek. But exhaustion didn't stop me, not anymore. If anything, it pushed me harder. Every night I heard Evan's voice in my head, mocking me, belittling me, trying to convince me I was nothing. And every morning I forced myself to get up, put on my apron, and prove him wrong in ways he couldn't yet see. Even my boss started to notice. One evening, after I reorganized the way we handled the dessert station, he walked past me and muttered, half joking, "You run this place better than I do." He laughed, but I didn't. I tucked those words into my chest like they were gold, because they reminded me I was more than just cute for a waitress. But Evan, he didn't stop. He kept rolling his eyes whenever I mentioned the notebook, kept dismissing my ideas as childish fantasies, kept reminding me of my place. And though I never told him, I made a decision in those quiet moments he wasn't watching. I decided my place wasn't going to be beside him. My place was going to be above him. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But I knew I was building something he would never see coming. And then, one night, as I was rolling silverware at the counter, I overheard a conversation that made my heart skip a beat. The owner, Luis, was leaning against the wall, speaking in a tired, defeated voice to one of our suppliers. "I'm thinking about selling," he said. In that instant, the notebook, the data, the sleepless nights, all of it, collided inside me like lightning. Selling, the diner might be for sale. And just like that, my quiet ambition had a direction. The words didn't just hang in the air. They echoed inside me, over and over, until they were all I could hear. "I'm thinking about selling," Luis had said, his voice low and weary. He hadn't meant for me to hear it. He was just venting to a supplier, sighing in that way only people do when they've carried too much for too long. But I heard it, and the sound of it nearly stopped my heart. For years, the diner had been my world. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't spotless, but it was mine in the ways that mattered. It was where I'd grown stronger, where I'd survived, where I'd begun to imagine a life beyond what Evan's laughter said I was allowed to have. And now, just like that, it might slip away into someone else's hands. Panic hit first, a rush of fear so sharp it almost knocked the wind out of me. What if Luis sold it to some chain restaurant? What if they gutted the place, slapped a shiny logo on the walls, and erased every trace of the life that pulsed here? What if the staff, the people I worked shoulder to shoulder with, lost their jobs? What if I lost mine? My paycheck wasn't much, but it was survival. Without it, I didn't know how I'd keep a roof over my head. I spent the rest of that shift moving on autopilot, smiling, taking orders, filling drinks, while my mind spun faster and faster. And in that storm of panic, another thought sparked. It was small at first, fragile, almost laughable. But it grew louder with each passing minute, until it drowned out everything else. What if I bought it? The idea was ridiculous. Me, the girl who scraped together rent with tips and leftovers, the one who slept with a notebook as if it were a lifeline, I couldn't buy a restaurant. Could I? The question lingered, stubborn, unwilling to leave, no matter how many times I told myself it was impossible. That night, I went to Evan. I wanted him to be proud. I wanted him to see me not as his waitress, not as someone clinging to the scraps of his approval, but as a woman with a vision, with fire in her chest. I wanted, just once, to see him look at me and not laugh. We were sitting in his apartment, him scrolling through his phone, me holding the notebook in my lap, like a secret I was about to unveil. Luis might sell the diner, I said softly. He didn't even look up. So you'll get another job. No, I whispered, the word trembling but fierce. I don't want another job. I want to buy it. That got his attention. His head snapped up, his eyes wide for a moment before they narrowed, and then he laughed. A sharp, cruel laugh that made my stomach twist. You? Buy the diner? Sarah, come on. Be serious. I am serious, I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to push through. I know how it works now. I've been studying. I've been tracking everything. The sales, the busy nights, the waste. I know what could make it profitable. If I could just stop. He cut me off, still laughing. You're a waitress. That's all you'll ever be? You think scribbling in that stupid little book makes you a businesswoman? What are you going to do? Buy a restaurant with tip money? Sell enough pancakes to become a CEO? He leaned back, smirking. Face it, Sarah, you should be grateful you even have that job. And when it sells, maybe you'll finally get something better. Something that doesn't make me look like I'm dating the help. I sat there, my chest burning, my cheeks hot, my fingers digging into the leather cover of the notebook until my nails left half moons in it. I wanted to scream, to tell him how wrong he was, but I didn't, not this time, because in that moment something shifted. His laughter didn't crush me anymore. It lit a fuse. Every word he sneered became fuel. And instead of arguing, I just stared at him and thought, watch me. A few days later, I found myself confiding in the woman at table 7. She listened quietly, her tea steaming between us, her book pushed aside. When I told her Luis was thinking about selling, her eyes didn't widen, her lips didn't purse in shock. She just nodded, calm, steady, as though she had been waiting for this. Then what are you going to do about it? She asked. My heart pounded. I want to buy it, I admitted, the words tumbling out like a confession. She set her cup down, folded her hands, and nodded once. Good, she said. Then you'd better start preparing, because opportunities like this don't come twice. Her certainty rattled me to my core. I had no money, no investors, no plan. But she looked at me like she already saw me holding the keys, running the place as if I'd been born to do it. And for the first time, I started to see it too. That night, I went home and spread the notebook across the floor. I pored over every page until my eyes blurred, tracing the faded handwriting like it was scripture. Notes about supplier contracts, about how to stretch $1 until it turned into $2, about how to spot waste before it drained your profits. It was all there. Answers I didn't even know I needed. I thought about Luis, about the weight in his voice. I thought about my coworkers, the ones who'd become my family. I thought about the regulars who smiled when I brought them their coffee, the ones who tipped me with coins stacked neatly on the table. And most of all, I thought about Evan, his smug laughter, his dismissive words, his belief that I was nothing but a punchline. No, I would not let him define me, not anymore. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know where the money would come from, or how. Many walls I'd have to crash through. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had to try. And so, with nothing but a battered notebook, a stubborn dream, and a fire that humiliation had lit inside me, I made the choice that would change everything. I would find a way to buy the diner. The moment I decided I wanted to buy the diner, it was as if something inside me had shifted permanently. For years I had been moving through life, just trying to survive, stacking shifts, scraping together rent, stretching every tip as far as it would go. But now there was a goal, a clear, shining goal that made my blood run hot with determination. I didn't just want to work in that diner anymore. I wanted to own it. I wanted to take everything I had learned in secret, every page of that notebook from Table 7, and turn it into something real. I started preparing like my life depended on it. I spent every spare minute building a folder full of receipts, budgets, and handwritten notes. I drew up rough menus and sketched out staffing plans. I calculated profit margins with the help of online resources, double-checking them against the strategies written in the notebook. Some nights I stayed up until sunrise, my tiny kitchen table buried under stacks of paper, a cold cup of coffee sitting untouched beside me. My hands cramped from writing, my eyes burned from staring at numbers, but I didn't stop. For the first time in my life, exhaustion didn't feel like a dead end. It felt like momentum. When I finally gathered the courage to walk into a bank, I thought maybe, just maybe, they would see the fire in me. I wore my best blouse, one I had ironed 3 times that morning, and held my folder like it was proof of my worth. The loan officer barely looked at it. He flipped through the first couple of pages, then leaned back in his chair with a sigh that told me he had already made his decision. "Do you have collateral?" he asked. I blinked. Collateral? Property, assets, anything of significant value that we could use to secure the loan, he explained, his tone polite but bored. I shook my head, my cheeks heating. I don't own anything like that. Just my car, but it barely runs. He closed the folder and slid it back across the desk to me. "I'm sorry, miss. Without collateral, we can't move forward. The risk is simply too high." I walked out of that office with my stomach knotted, gripping the folder so tightly my knuckles ached. But I told myself it was just one rejection. One door closed. There had to be others. The second bank was the same, only worse. The woman across from me smiled the entire time. as though she pitied me. "Restaurants are risky, even for seasoned professionals," she said. "You're young, you don't have savings, no assets, and no business history. If we approved you, we'd be setting you up to fail. Why don't you focus on saving for now? Maybe in 5 or 10 years, you'll be in a better position." 5 or 10 years. I wanted to laugh in her face. Luis wasn't going to wait 5 or 10 years. The diner would be sold in months, maybe weeks. 5 or 10 years might as well have been forever. By the third rejection, I stopped listening to their full explanations. The phrases blurred together. Too risky, not enough history. Come back when you're more established. Every meeting ended the same way, with me walking back out into the cold air, my hope shrinking a little smaller each time. Of course, Evan was waiting for me at the end of those days, his smug grin ready to twist the knife deeper. "So, did they laugh in your face yet?" he asked one evening when I dropped the folder onto his table, too drained to speak. He chuckled to himself and shook his head. "I told you, Sarah, you're wasting your time. You'll never pull this off. Just admit it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the folder at him and storm out. But instead, I sat in silence. Because I realized something important. Every time he mocked me, it didn't crush me anymore. It fueled me. His laughter had become gasoline, feeding the fire inside me. Still, I would be lying if I said I didn't reach a breaking point. After weeks of rejections, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the notebook spread open in front of me, tears streaming down my face. My hands shook as I traced the handwriting on the pages, wondering if I had been a fool to think I could ever do this. Maybe Evan was right. Maybe I was just a waitress, nothing more. Maybe all of this, the late nights, the studying, the dreaming, was a waste of time. But then I remembered the words of the woman at table 7 the night she gave me the notebook. "You already think like an owner. You just don't realize it yet." I stared at those pages through my tears and forced myself to breathe. Owners don't quit after rejection. Owners don't crumble when doors slam in their faces. Owners find another way in. So I wiped my cheeks, pulled the papers closer, and forced myself to think differently. If the banks wouldn't help me, then maybe I needed to stop looking at institutions and start looking at people, partners, investors, anyone who believed in me enough to take a chance. And that was when the new plan began to form. When the banks slammed their doors in my face, I realized I had been thinking about this the wrong way. I kept trying to prove myself to strangers in suits who would never see beyond my apron. They didn't care about the nights I stayed awake, crunching numbers under a dim lamp. They didn't care that I had studied every shift like a scientist, looking for ways to make the diner better. To them, I wasn't a businesswoman. I wasn't even a risk worth taking. I was just a waitress with dreams too big for her pockets. But the diner wasn't built on suits or banks. It was built on people. The ones who came in every morning for coffee before work. The ones who slid into booths every Friday night after the game. The ones who tipped me in quarters because that's all they had, but they still wanted to give something. These people knew me. They had seen me hustling through late shifts, carrying plates with a smile, even when I was running on fumes. If anyone might believe in me, maybe it was them. I started small. One night after closing, when the air smelled of bleach and the sound of clinking dishes echoed in the kitchen, I gathered a few coworkers by the counter. "You heard about Luis, right?" I asked. They nodded grimly. Everyone had heard. Luis had been quieter lately, slower on his feet, and when the register came up short, his sigh was heavier than usual. "Has selling?" I said softly. And if a chain buys this place, we're done. They'll clean house, bring in their own staff. We'll all be out." There was a long silence before the cook. A gruff man named Tony muttered, "Figures, nothing lasts forever." My heart pounded as I forced the words out. What if I bought it? The room went still. One of the servers actually laughed, not cruelly, but in disbelief. "You," she said, "Sarah, you can't even afford a new car." I felt my cheeks heat, but I held my ground. I know it sounds crazy, but I've been studying. I know how to run this place better than anyone else. I've been tracking sales, customer flow, waste, you name it. I know what works and what doesn't. They looked at me like I had sprouted wings, but instead of backing down, I pulled out the notebook from table 7. I flipped it open on the counter, showing them the pages filled with handwritten notes and charts. This isn't just a dream. This is a plan. For the first time, I saw hesitation turn into curiosity. Tony scratched his chin. "You're saying you could actually keep this place afloat?" "Not just afloat," I said firmly. "I could make it better. I've already tested changes, you've seen it. Faster service, smoother shifts, heavier tip jars. We all felt it. This place doesn't need saving, it needs direction, and I can give it that." There was a long silence before one of the younger servers asked, almost in a whisper, "What would you need from us?" "Support," I said. "If I can show Luis that I have backing from staff, from regulars, from suppliers, then maybe he'll take me seriously. And if we show investors that this isn't just one girl chasing a crazy dream, but a team ready to work, then maybe, just maybe, we'll stand a chance." Slowly, they nodded. Not a full commitment, but no longer disbelief. Just possibility. The next step was harder. Suppliers. These were men and women who had delivered crates of produce and bags of flour to the diner for years. People who knew exactly how much money the place bled each month. Convincing them wouldn't be easy, but to my surprise, a few leaned in, with interest when I laid out my vision. "If you can really make those numbers work, I'd give you a discount for the first year," one said cautiously. Another added, "I can't put in cash, but I can extend credit on supplies. You'll need it." It wasn't money, but it was something, a lifeline. And something about the way they said it made me stand taller. Even some of the regulars surprised me. An older man who had been coming in every Saturday for 2 decades pressed a $20 bill into my hand after I told him what I wanted. "I've eaten here since your first day on the floor," he said. "If it means keeping this place alive, I'll help however I can. Might not be much, but it's yours." My throat tightened so much I could barely thank him. For the first time, I felt momentum. For the first time, I wasn't carrying this dream alone. But with momentum came resistance. Not everyone wanted me to succeed. One afternoon, I overheard a rival diner owner talking to Luis by the back door. He was slick, dressed in a sharp suit that didn't belong in a greasy kitchen. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind that strips the skin off your bones. "You really think you can pull this off, sweetheart?" he said, his voice smooth but cutting. "This is business. It's not about waiting tables and smiling pretty." He turned back to Luis. "I'll make you a serious offer. Cash, more than she could ever dream of." My stomach dropped. The clock was ticking faster than I realized. I wasn't just fighting doubt. I was fighting competition. And they had more money, more connections, more everything. That night, I went back to the woman at table 7. I poured it all out, the pledges, the promises from suppliers, the rival who wanted to buy the diner out from under me. She listened, her eyes steady, her face unreadable. When I finished, she set her teacup down and leaned in. Then you'd better be ready to prove yourself, she said. People will test you. Some will betray you. But the ones who matter will stand with you. Show Luis you're serious. Not just hopeful, serious. Show him you're ready to fight for it. Her words echoed in me all night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Fight for it. I had less money than anyone else who might make an offer, but what I lacked in cash, I made up for in grit. And grit, I was beginning to learn, could be just as valuable. The next day, Luis called a staff meeting. His voice was tired, but his eyes were steady. I've made my decision, he said, looking at each of us in turn. I'm selling the diner. I already have interest from buyers. If anyone here is serious about making an offer, you have 10 days to show me. 10 days. 10 days to do the impossible. 10 days to turn promises, scraps of support, and a battered notebook into something real. My pulse thundered in my ears, but in that moment, I made a silent vow. This was it. This was my fight, and I wasn't walking away. 10 days, that was all Luis gave us. 10 days to either prove ourselves or watch the diner slip away into someone else's hands. The number pressed against me like a countdown clock, ticking in my ears, each tick louder than the last. I barely slept that first night. My ceiling became a blank canvas for every fear I had ever carried. What if I failed? What if Evan was right? What if, when those 10 days ended, I was left standing in the same apron, in the same booth, only now with a broken dream and nothing to show for it. But mixed in with the fear was fire. I couldn't let go, not now, not after everything, the notebook, the promises, the sacrifices. I had to fight. The very next morning, I began making lists, not just of numbers, but of people. Every coworker who had nodded when I first said I wanted to buy the diner. Every supplier who had hinted at helping. Every regular who had shown loyalty over the years. One by one, I visited them, my hands shaking but my voice firm. I asked them not just for kind words, but for action. To my coworkers, I asked for written statements of support. If Luis sees this isn't just me, I explained, but the whole staff behind me, he'll have to take me seriously. Some hesitated, but others agreed quickly. Sarah, you're the only one crazy enough to even try this, Tony the cook muttered as he scrawled his signature on a letter. And honestly, that's exactly why you might actually pull it off. To suppliers, I asked for pledges, credit terms, discounts, anything that would lighten the load of starting fresh. One supplier, a woman named Carla who had been delivering produce to us for years, leaned across her desk and said, "I've seen how you run things when the boss isn't around. If anyone can make that place profitable, it's you. I'll give you 3 months of extended credit. No interest." My throat tightened as I thanked her, barely able to speak. The regulars were the hardest to approach. I didn't want to beg, but I had no choice but to be honest. If I don't step up, this place will be gone, I told them. Some looked at me like I was crazy, but others reached into their wallets and pressed folded bills into my hand. One older man, who had eaten at the diner every Saturday for 2 decades, slipped me a crumpled 20. "It's not much," he said softly, "but I believe in you." Every time someone gave me a pledge or a letter, it felt like a small miracle. My folder grew heavier with papers that weren't money, but were proof that I wasn't alone in this fight. But when I added it all up at my kitchen table on the 3rd night, my stomach dropped. It wasn't enough, not even close. No matter how many signatures, IOUs, or supplier discounts I stacked together, it all added up to a fraction of what I needed. The rival diner owner Slick, confident, with a checkbook that could swallow mine whole, could make an offer Louis couldn't refuse. By the fourth day, doubt crept in again. It didn't whisper this time, it screamed. What if I was setting myself up to be humiliated in front of everyone? What if I walked into Louis' office with my scraps? And he laughed in my face the way Evan always did. Evan, of course, never missed an opportunity to make it worse. Each night when I dragged myself into his apartment, with the notebook tucked under my arm and exhaustion carved into my face, he was waiting. "How's the fantasy going, Sarah?" he smirked. "Did you convince a couple of customers to give you their spare change? That'll definitely buy you a diner." When I refused to rise to his bait, his voice grew sharper. "Face it, you were born to serve tables, not own them. The sooner you accept that, the happier you'll be." I should have left him then. I should have walked out the door and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at him silently, letting his words roll off me like rain on steel. Because by then I had learned something. Evan's laughter wasn't poison anymore. It was fuel. Every time he told me I couldn't, the fire inside me roared louder, screaming back, "Watch me." By the sixth day, I was desperate. My nerves frayed with every passing hour. Finally, I went to Luis directly. My palms were sweating as I placed the folder of pledges and letters on his desk. "I know this isn't money," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "But look at this. People believe in me. They're willing to back me. If you give me a chance, I'll find the rest. I'll do whatever it takes." Luis opened the folder and leafed through the pages. I watched his face closely, searching for any sign, hope, approval, doubt. He lingered on the letters from staff, the notes from suppliers, the scrawled pledges from regulars. His eyes softened, but his words made my stomach twist. "Sarah," he said gently, "I don't doubt your heart. I can see you care about this place more than anyone. But heart doesn't pay bills. I need real numbers, real proof. You have 4 more days. If you can't show me the money, I can't hold this place for you. 4 days." That was all I had left. I stumbled out of his office, clutching the folder to my chest, my vision blurred with tears. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the notebook open in front of me, my hands shaking. For the first time, I felt myself breaking. Maybe Evan was right. Maybe the banks were right. Maybe I was just a waitress chasing an impossible dream. But then my eyes fell on a line scrawled in the notebook's margin, written in the steady hand of the woman at table 7. "You already think like an owner. You just don't realize it yet. Owners don't quit. Owners don't crumble when doors slam shut. Owners find another way." I wiped my tears and forced myself to think differently. If I couldn't find the money through banks or pledges, I had to look at what I already had. And that was when I remembered the small jewelry box tucked away in the back of my closet. Inside was the only valuable thing I owned, my mother's ring. She had given it to me before she passed, pressing it into my hand with a smile that still haunted me. "It's not much," she had said, "but it's yours. Keep it safe." I pulled it out, staring at the delicate band glinting in the dim light. My chest tightened. I had sworn I would never part with it. It was all I had left of her. But as I turned it over in my hand, I heard her voice in my mind. My mother had been a fighter, a survivor. She wouldn't have wanted me to cling to a ring if it meant losing my future. She would have wanted me to use it, to build something stronger, something lasting. The next morning, I walked into a pawn shop with shaking hands. The man behind the counter examined the ring, squinting through his glasses. "It's worth something," he muttered, scribbling on a notepad. When he slid the stack of cash across the counter, my throat closed. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough to show Luis I wasn't just talking. Enough to prove I was willing to sacrifice for this dream. When I placed the stack of bills on Luis' desk later that day, he looked at me for a long, silent moment. His eyes searched mine, weighing not just the money, but the determination behind it. Finally, he nodded slowly. "You've got guts, Sarah," he said. "More than most. Bring me the rest, and the diner is yours." It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first real crack in the wall. The breakthrough I had been chasing wasn't just about money. It was about showing I would give up everything, even the most precious thing I owned, to make this happen. As I walked out of his office, clutching the receipt from the pawn shop and the battered notebook from table 7, my heart pounded with certainty. The diner was within reach, and Evan, with all his smug laughter, had no idea how close I was to proving him wrong. By the time the 10th day came, I felt like I had lived a lifetime in just over a week. My body was running on fumes, fueled by nothing more than caffeine, adrenaline, and sheer willpower. Every second of those 10 days had been a battle running between suppliers, gathering pledges, pawning my mother's ring, convincing coworkers and regulars to believe in me. I hadn't eaten properly. I hadn't slept more than a few hours each night, but I didn't care. This was it. Either I walked into Louis' office today with enough to prove myself, or I walked out with nothing but a broken dream. I wasn't the only one preparing. Word had spread that a rival diner owner, slick, wealthy, experienced, was making a serious bid. Not whispers, not rumors, but hard fact. He was prepared to pay, cash, up front, enough to make any sensible man fold on the spot. Against that, my folder of pledges and the pawnshop cash felt like pennies. My chest tightened at the thought of Luis sitting at his desk, weighing a fat check against my stack of scraps. And then there was Evan. He had been circling like a vulture all week, waiting for me to collapse. That morning, as I stood in front of the mirror, trying to smooth the wrinkles out of my one decent blouse, he leaned against the doorway with a smirk. "Big day, huh?" he said casually, his voice dripping with mockery. "Ready to embarrass yourself?" I kept my eyes on the mirror, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. But he wasn't done. "Let's face it, Sarah. You're about to walk in there with pocket change while real businessmen make real offers. Luis isn't going to hand the diner to you. Why would he? You're a waitress. That's all you'll ever be. And when it's all over, maybe you'll finally stop chasing this stupid dream and accept your place." Something inside me snapped. I turned to face him, my hands trembling but my voice steady, sharper than it had ever been. "You know what, Evan? You've laughed at me from the moment we met. Every dream I had, every hope, every spark of ambition, you tried to stomp it out. But today, whether I win or lose, I'm walking in there with something you'll never have: courage. I'd rather fail 100 times chasing my dream than spend one more day living small so you can feel big. And after today, you don't get to laugh at me anymore." For the first time, his smirk faltered. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I didn't wait for him to recover. I grabbed my folder and walked out the door without looking back. The diner felt different that morning. The hum of the refrigerators, the smell of coffee brewing, everything was sharper, louder, heavier, as though the building itself knew its fate was about to be decided. When I reached Louis' office, my pulse thundered in my ears. Inside, the rival diner owner was already seated. He was everything I wasn't: sharp suit, polished shoes, slick hair that gleamed under the fluorescent light. A leather briefcase rested by his chair, and I didn't need to ask what was inside. He glanced at me as I entered, his lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, good," he said smoothly. "The waitress is here." I was starting to think we'd waste the morning waiting for her fairy tale. I ignored him, forcing myself to breathe evenly as I sat down across from Luis. My hands shook as I set the folder on the desk. Inside was everything I had managed to gather: pledges from staff, letters from customers, promises from suppliers, and the cash I had scraped together by pawning away the last memory of my mother. It wasn't the most money in the room, not by a long shot, but it was mine, and it was real. Louis' face was unreadable as he opened the folder. The only sounds were the turning of pages and the occasional shuffle of paper. My heart pounded harder with every second. Across the room, the rival leaned back in his chair, confident, smug, tapping his fingers on the desk, as though he already owned the place. Finally, Luis set the folder down and looked up. His eyes lingered on me, and in that gaze, I saw something I hadn't dared hope for respect. "Sarah," he said slowly, "you don't have the highest offer, not even close. But what you do have is something the others don't. You have the heart of this place. You have the staff, the customers, the suppliers, all standing behind you, and that matters more than cash." The rival shot forward in his chair, his voice rising. "This is insane. I'm offering you double what she scraped together. Cash, today. You'll never see a deal like this again." Luis lifted his hand, calm but firm. "I've poured my life into this diner. It's not just a building, not just a business. It's my legacy, and I refuse to sell it to someone who sees it as nothing more than a line in a ledger. I want to sell it to someone who will protect it, someone who understands what it means. And that someone is Sarah." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My knees went weak, my eyes blurred with tears that I fought to hold back. It wasn't finished yet. I still had paperwork to finalize, money to pull together, but in that moment, the hardest battle had been won. Luis believed in me. The rival diner owner shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "You'll regret this," he spat at Luis, then turned to me, his eyes narrowing into slits. "And so will you. You'll run this place into the ground within 6 months." He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. But his words bounced off me like rain against steel. Because in that office, in that moment, I had been chosen. Against the odds, against the money, against the laughter, I had been chosen. As I walked out of Louis' office, the signed preliminary agreement clutched in my trembling hands, I thought of Evan. I thought of every cruel word, every sneer, every smirk he had ever thrown at me. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Because soon, he wasn't just going to see how wrong he had been, he was going to feel it. Because fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. And Evan had no idea that the first person he'd be firing was him. The papers were signed, the ink dried, and for the first time in my life, I was no longer just clocking to someone else's dream. I was the owner. The diner, the one that had been my stage of humiliation, my classroom of resilience, and my battleground of survival was finally mine. The chipped counter I had leaned on while doubting myself. The squeaky door that greeted me every morning. The neon sign that buzzed above me on endless late-night shifts. All of it was mine now. The keys rested in my hand, heavier than I expected, not because of the metal, but because of what they symbolized. Every insult I had endured, every rejection I had faced, every night I had fought to keep the dream alive. That first morning as owner, I arrived before the sun. The streets were still dark. the air cool and quiet. But when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the diner came alive. The fluorescent lights flickered on, humming like a heartbeat. The smell of old coffee grounds clung to the air, mixed with the faint trace of fried bacon in the walls. I walked through slowly, touching each booth, running my fingers along the counter, pausing at the coffee machine that had fueled both me and countless tired customers through hard days. Every inch of the place felt different now. It wasn't just a workplace anymore. It was a legacy, my legacy. The staff trickled in, one by one, each pausing when they saw me behind the counter, not in my apron, but standing tall as the owner. Their eyes widened, then softened with pride. One by one, they hugged me, clapped me on the back, whispered words like, "You did it, and we're with you." For the first time, I wasn't just part of the team. I was leading it, but I knew there was one last piece of unfinished business. Evan. He walked in around noon, strutting like he owned the place, his smirk as sharp as ever. He didn't even glance at the under new management sign taped to the window. He slid into a booth, stretching out like he was settling into a throne. "So," he drawled, his voice loud enough for the staff and a few customers to hear, "the rumors are true. You actually managed to trick Luis into selling you the place." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Cute, real cute. But let's be honest, Sarah, you're in over your head. Running a diner isn't slinging pancakes and topping off coffee. It's numbers, payroll, taxes, suppliers. You have no idea what you're doing. Within a month, you'll be begging me for help." The staff froze. A few customers turned in their seats, watching. Evan loved an audience, and for years I had been the easy punchline to his jokes. But not anymore. I straightened my back, feeling the weight of the keys in my pocket, and walked toward his booth. My voice was calm, steady, but it carried across the room. "You're right about one thing, Evan. Running a diner is real work. And that's exactly why you don't belong here." His smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward, my hands resting on the table between us, meeting his eyes without flinching. "It means you're fired." The room went silent. Forks paused midair. Coffee cups hovered just shy of lips. My staff stared wide-eyed, holding their breath. Evan barked a laugh, though it sounded weaker than usual. "Fired? You can't fire me. I don't even work here." "Exactly," I said, my voice sharper now. "You never worked here. You never lifted me up. You never believed in me. All you ever did was laugh at me, belittle me, try to make me small. But here's the thing, Evan, I'm not small anymore, and you don't get a seat at my table. Not here, not in my life, not ever again. So yes, you're fired from this diner, from this community, and from me." For the first time since I had met him, Evan's confidence cracked. His smirk slipped, his jaw tightened, his eyes darted around the room, searching for support he no longer had. But my staff stood firm. The customers who had watched me serve them with a smile for years nodded quietly, a few even clapping under their breath. The power he had lorded over me for so long had evaporated, and he knew it. His face flushed red as he pushed back from the booth, his voice low and bitter. "You'll regret this, Sarah. You think you're strong, but you're not. You'll crash and burn, and when you do, don't come crawling back to me." I straightened, smiling at him, not with malice, not with fear, but with something stronger. "The only regret I have, Evan, is wasting so many years letting you convince me I was less than I am. But not anymore. I know my worth now. And there's nothing you can do to take that from me." He grabbed his jacket and stormed out, the bell above the diner door jangling violently as it slammed shut behind him. For a moment, The silence lingered, and then, slowly, it shifted. The staff let out quiet cheers. Customers clapped. Someone shouted, "Good for you, Sarah." And laughter bubbled through the room, not cruel laughter like Evan's, but laughter full of relief, pride, and victory. I turned back toward the counter, picked up the coffee pot, and started pouring cups again, my hands steady, my heart light. For years, Evan had laughed at me for being just a waitress. For years, he had mocked the apron I wore and the life I lived. But now, standing in my own diner, surrounded by people who believed in me, I finally had the last laugh. And it was louder, stronger, and more satisfying than his had ever been.